Good evening, I'm Serena, and this is Inside News for Thursday, October 9th, 2025. Tonight, we examine the stories shaping our world beyond the familiar narratives, tracking developments from 5 continents where consequential events unfold far from the spotlight. From diplomatic breakthroughs in long-standing conflicts to systemic issues threatening millions, we prioritize what matters over what trends. We begin in Africa, where economic initiatives and political tensions define today's landscape. South Africa secured $500 million in international funding on October 9, 2025, targeting economic development and infrastructure with $200 million allocated specifically for renewable energy transitions in Gauteng and Western Cape provinces. The initiative aims to enhance South Africa's regional influence through strategic partnerships. Though economists warn of potential inflationary pressures if monetary policy fails to keep pace with investment inflows, the move positions Johannesburg as a magnet for capital amid global market volatility. South Africa's central bank and treasury officials reached consensus on October 9, 2025, to lower the national inflation target from 4.5% to 3%. Though implementation timing remains contested amid post-pandemic recovery. The decision aligns with global monetary standards and aims to stabilize the rand, which has fluctuated 5% against the US dollar this year. Financial markets in Johannesburg anticipate tighter monetary policy that may constrain consumer spending while strengthening investor confidence. The University of Fort Hare in South Africa shut down on October 9, 2025, after protests by over 1,000 students demanding increased funding and infrastructure improvements following national education budget cuts of 10%. University administration and student unions face a standoff that threatens academic calendars, exposing persistent inequalities in higher education access across the continent. Angola's president, currently leading the African Union, announced plans for Africa-EU cooperation exceeding €1 billion over 5 years during a Luanda summit on October 9, 2025. Discussions centered on vaccine distribution networks and sub-Saharan road infrastructure, with European Commission representatives projecting a 20% reduction in disease outbreaks across targeted regions. The framework establishes mechanisms for joint health security that could reshape continental medical access. Bloomberg's October 9, 2025 broadcast documented a 15% surge in commodity exports from Nigeria and Ethiopia, generating $2 billion in additional quarterly revenue driven by global demand for oil and coffee. OPEC representatives and African trade unions addressed supply chain constraints, with the data underscoring Africa's expanding economic leverage. These revenues fund social programs while reducing regional trade deficits. A state audit released October 8, 2025, revealed that mining companies in the Democratic Republic of Congo underreported $16.8 billion in revenue between 2018 and 2023, depriving communities of development funds. Major firms, including Glencore, face scrutiny over cobalt and copper export discrepancies amid surging global demand. The Court of Auditors findings could erode trust in resource governance and hinder sustainable development goals by 2030. Farial Zarouki, Chief Trade and Industry Officer at De Beers Group, announced her departure at month's end following her leadership of diamond trade reforms in Botswana and Namibia. Her role impacted $5 billion in annual revenues amid mounting ethical sourcing pressures. The executive shift may disrupt supply chains affecting 100,000 jobs and intensify transparency demands across Africa's gem sector. Asia presents a complex picture today, from diplomatic breakthroughs to escalating cyber threats. U.S. President Donald Trump announced on October 9, 2025, that Israel and Hamas agreed to the first phase of a peace framework, facilitating the release of all remaining hostages in exchange for Palestinian prisoners. Months of negotiations involving Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Hamas leaders, and U.S. mediators produced the agreement amid a conflict that has displaced over 1 million people since 2023. The breakthrough potentially stabilizes oil prices, which rose 8% this year due to regional tensions. The U.S. Senate confirmed Michael Desambre as Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs on October 9, 2025, positioning him to lead potential negotiations with North Korea amid escalating missile tests. Desambre's diplomatic background under Trump administration involves coordinating with South Korea and Japan, where defense spending increased 12%. His confirmation strengthens U.S. alliances aimed at deterring further regional provocations. Fast Retailing, owner of Uniqlo, reported a 13% jump in full-year profit on October 9, 2025, forecasting a fifth consecutive record year, driven by expansion into India and Southeast Asia. Net sales reached 2.5 trillion yen, with aggressive store openings planned across 20 new countries. The retail sector's resilience translates to an estimated 50,000 new jobs worldwide. China's Foreign Ministry spokesperson Guo Jiakun announced new tariffs on $10 billion worth of U.S. imports during an October 9, 2025 press conference, responding to ongoing trade disputes dating to 2018. Ministry of Commerce officials warn these measures could disrupt global supply chains and increase costs for Asian consumers. The escalation underscores persistent need for diplomatic resolution. China Nexus actors weaponized the open-source Nezha tool for remote monitoring attacks as reported October 8, 2025, enabling espionage operations targeting Asian firms. State-linked hackers bypassed traditional defenses, heightening cybersecurity threats that could erode trust in regional digital infrastructure by 2030. North Korea's Kim Jong-un celebrated the ruling party's 80th anniversary on October 9, 2025, with foreign delegations visiting Pyongyang and military parades involving 5,000 troops following recent missile launches. The event signals potential openings in international relations, though humanitarian concerns persist, with food shortages affecting 40% of the population. North Korea-linked hackers stole a record $2 billion in cryptocurrency in 2025, as of October 8, 2025, funding regime activities despite sanctions. Cyber groups like Lazarus orchestrated operations dwarfing previous hauls. These stolen assets finance nuclear programs, challenging global financial security infrastructure. Europe grapples with political stability and security concerns today. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen survived 2 no-confidence votes in the European Parliament on October 9, 2025, securing her position amid debates over 1.8 trillion euros in EU budget allocations. Members of Parliament from various parties challenged her handling of migration policies that have processed 200,000 arrivals this year. Her continued leadership enables progress on green energy transitions, with 500 billion euros in targeted investments. Eurogroup finance ministers convened in Brussels on October 9, 2025, agreeing on debt reduction targets of 60% GDP for member states. Discussions centered on post-COVID recovery funds, totaling 750 billion euros, involving European Central Bank leadership. The fiscal discipline could stabilize the euro, which appreciated 3% against the US dollar, supporting growth in vulnerable economies like Greece. Sweden reported hybrid warfare activities linked to a Russian Orthodox church on October 9, 2025, involving disinformation campaigns reaching 1 million online users. Swedish security services and Russian operatives operate amid heightened NATO tensions since 2022. The revelation prompts increased defense budgets by 5% across Europe. Germany repealed a fast-track citizenship scheme on October 9, 2025, affecting 50,000 applicants amid debates on integration policies stemming from 2023 reforms. Interior Ministry officials face criticism over delays in naturalization, potentially exacerbating social divisions in multicultural cities like Berlin. The European Council outlined priorities for October 6th to 19th, 2025, focusing on energy security with €300 billion in renewable investments. EU heads of state addressed dependencies on Russian gas, reduced 80% since 2022. These measures foster energy independence, mitigating price volatility that impacted households by 15%. The EU chief prosecutor urged member states on October 2, 2025, to combat tax fraud gangs, with underreported imports from China costing €800 million in lost VAT. Organized crime and customs officials operate across multiple borders. These fiscal losses could reduce public services funding by 5% across the EU. The European Parliament renewed calls on October 9, 2025, for China to release Swedish publisher Gui Minhai, kidnapped 10 years prior. Reporters Without Borders supports this press freedom campaign. The case pressures human rights norms, influencing EU-China relations. The Americas face political tensions and environmental challenges today. U.S. President Donald Trump announced an October 9, 2025 hostage and prisoner exchange between Israel and Hamas, with over 100 hostages set for release following a year of conflict displacing 2 million Palestinians. U.S. diplomats mediated the breakthrough. The de-escalation potentially influences U.S. foreign aid allocations of $3 billion annually. Democrats gained momentum in government shutdown fights on October 9, 2025, with polls showing 60% public disapproval of Republican handling amid threats to thousands of federal jobs. Congressional leaders and President Trump remain deadlocked over $1.2 trillion in budget spending. Market volatility followed, with stock indices dropping 2%. Mexico unveiled a plan on October 9, 2025, to combat deforestation from avocado farming, targeting 50,000 hectares in Michoacan, where illegal logging destroyed 20% of forests since 2010. Environmental agencies and farmers' cooperatives coordinate reforestation efforts funded by $100 million. The initiative aids indigenous communities, reducing water shortages, affecting 100,000 people. Weather forecasts across the Americas on October 9, 2025, warned of severe hurricane conditions impacting Florida, with estimated damages of $5 billion. Fox Weather reported wind speeds reaching 120 miles per hour, prompting FEMA responses. The disaster strains resources in affected states. A poll conducted by The Hill on October 9, 2025, revealed 55% of Americans blame both political parties for shutdown mismanagement amid economic uncertainty. The sentiment reflects divisions persisting since 2024 elections, pushing for bipartisan fiscal reforms. Oceania confronts natural disasters and economic recovery today. New Zealand's Herald Now broadcast on October 9, 2025, reported severe weather affecting Auckland, with storms causing $50 million in infrastructure damage. Met Service recorded rainfall exceeding 100 millimeters in 24 hours, activating emergency services. The disaster necessitates enhanced resilience planning, impacting agricultural outputs by 10%. SBS News in Easy English on October 9, 2025, covered the Gaza Peace Framework, noting Australia's diplomatic support through $20 million in aid. Foreign Minister Penny Wong builds on UN resolutions with humanitarian implications for regional stability and Pacific migration patterns. Immigration updates in Australia on October 9, 2025, highlighted Social Security processing delays affecting 100,000 applicants amid policy reforms. Crown World Mobility data points to bureaucratic backlogs since 2024. The dysfunction strains workforce integration, with economic costs estimated at AUD 500 million. A World Earthquake Report on October 9, 2025. Documented seismic activity in the Pacific Ring of Fire with a 6.5 magnitude quake off Papua New Guinea, releasing energy equivalent to 0.4 atomic bombs. Volcano Discovery tracked 50 events involving local authorities. The activity bolsters early warning systems, reducing potential casualties. Pacific Waves broadcast on October 9, 2025, discussed Fiji's economic recovery with 4% GDP growth driven by tourism revenues of $1 billion. Pacific Island Forum leaders coordinate post-COVID strategies. The recovery fosters trade ties, enhancing food security for 10 million islanders. Now, the Buy on Spot segment, where I will leave Marcel to this presentation.
Good evening, Serena, and thank you for giving me the floor. Good evening to all our viewers. I'm Marcel, and this is the Beyond Spot, where we look past headlines to the realities that shape the silent half of our world. We turn now to stories that demand attention but receive none. Crises affecting millions that exist in the margins of mainstream coverage. Sudan faces what the UN describes as a catastrophic humanitarian crisis in Darfur, with mines and unexploded ordnance littering key roads and restricting humanitarian access. At least 120 aid workers have been killed since the war erupted in April 2023, with food and medicine convoys stalled for months. The IRC identifies Sudan as facing the largest humanitarian crisis ever recorded, with 16 million people requiring assistance and catastrophic food insecurity threatening famine in 2025. While Gaza dominates headlines, Sudan's suffering unfolds without cameras or sustained international pressure. All 10 of the most underreported humanitarian crises in 2024 occurred on the African continent. Angola has 2.2 million people requiring humanitarian aid, while in the Central African Republic, more than 12 years of armed conflict have displaced 1 in 5 people, leaving over 2.5 million struggling to find enough food. These crises receive minimal media attention despite affecting populations larger than many nations that dominate news cycles. The pattern reveals a troubling hierarchy where suffering is deemed newsworthy based on geography rather than scale. Burkina Faso, a landlocked country in West Africa home to over 23 million people, faces a rapidly escalating crisis that has gone largely unnoticed, with 1 million people requiring humanitarian aid. The silence around Burkina Faso exemplifies how crises evolve from manageable to catastrophic while the world looks elsewhere. When coverage finally arrives, it treats the situation as sudden rather than the predictable result of years of neglect. Underreported environmental destruction continues at scale. Mexico's October 9, 2025 plan to combat avocado-driven deforestation targets 50,000 hectares in Michoacán, where 20% of forests have been destroyed since 2010. Yet this receives a fraction of the attention compared to distant climate summits. The gap between rhetoric about environmental crisis and coverage of actual ecosystem collapse remains vast. The cybersecurity dimension of global conflict intensifies in shadows. North Korea-linked hackers stole a record $2 billion in cryptocurrency in 2025, and China Nexus actors weaponize the NESA open-source tool for espionage targeting Asian firms. These attacks fund nuclear programs and destabilize digital infrastructure, yet technical complexity keeps them from primetime coverage. We report wars with missiles, but not the ones fought through code. Corporate accountability gaps persist. Mining companies in the Democratic Republic of Congo underreported $16.8 billion in revenue between 2018 and 2023, costing communities development funds, while firms like Glencore profit from cobalt and copper. These aren't accounting errors, they're systematic extraction, hidden in financial complexity that mainstream outlets rarely penetrate. The systematic exclusion of these stories from coverage isn't accidental. They lack the visual drama that drives clicks, the geopolitical simplicity that fits into narratives, or the proximity to Western audiences that editors prioritize. But consequence doesn't require cameras to be real. 16 million Sudanese don't need your awareness to suffer, but they do need the pressure that awareness creates on those with power to act. You deserve complete information, not curated comfort. Every story we don't tell is a decision about whose lives matter enough to notice. Thank you for staying with us through Beyond Spot. I'm Marcel. Stay informed, stay conscious. And Serena, back to you.
Thank you, Marcel, for that powerful Beyond Spot. Your reporting reminds us that truth has no borders and that silence never absolves responsibility. The news emerging today from 5 continents reveals a world in transition. Diplomatic breakthroughs coexisting with persistent crises, economic recoveries shadowed by systemic vulnerabilities. The stories we've examined tonight, both prominent and overlooked, demand journalism that prioritizes consequence over convenience, that refuses to mistake silence for absence of suffering. The most important stories are often the ones no one is telling. We insist on telling them. With good journeys to all, good night.